So last month, Christopher Nolan's Tenet released around the globe, and while the reviews for it were positive and the fan reaction was positive, there was a bit of pushback to it at the same time. I went to go see it the first showing I could here in Austin, Texas, at the biggest theater I could find with the center seat to have the best experience that I could have. And if you watched my review for it when it came out, or my ranking of Christopher Nolan films that I did a month ago, I was kind of in that bit frustrated category of I loved the big ideas. I love that that Christopher Nolan is telling original stories, that he's kind of bringing in kind of these weird ideas that no one else is doing. And so we're seeing something different when Christopher Nolan makes a film. He, of course, has a great cast. There's some awesome spectacle in it. And with the time inversion stuff, literally things we've never seen on screen before, and doing it with practical effects, not just CGI explosions and stuff like that. I loved all of that. But I had a couple of things about the movie that really held it back for me. The first one is that I felt the movie was too confusing before we even got into the time inversion. That there's always a balance when you're making a film as to giving too much versus too little information. You're trying to balance between kind of those two things. You don't want to over-explain things and treat your audience like they're idiots, but you also don't want to say so little that they always feel like they're catching up. I felt with Tenet, I was constantly playing catch-up, and then people started going backwards in time, and so my brain was having to try and balance at the same time the forward and the backward. How do these intersect? And so it was just too confusing, and for the wrong reasons. I wouldn't mind if I was confused by the inversion stuff. It's the before that. That's where I started getting frustrating. The other big problem was when I saw it initially on the best theater I could see it at. It was a Cinemark XD theater. I had a lot of trouble hearing the dialogue. It was plenty loud, and maybe that's the problem. The ocean was really loud. The jet was really loud. The gunshots were really loud, but the dialogue was muffled by everything else, so I had trouble hearing it. At the same time, I said that in my review, my buddy that I went to go see it with, that was sitting literally right next to me. He watched my review and was texting me, "Dude, really? You couldn't hear it? I could hear it just fine." We all have different ears. We all have different experiences. I had trouble hearing it. Literally the guy next to me, no problems whatsoever. So this led to all of my videos that I put out where I've been discussing it. I've been on other channels talking about it, and some people have loved it. A lot of people were way more negative than me, and for me, I give it a B, and because there was a lot of things I loved, things that held it back, and then I had it next to last on my Christopher Nolan ranking that I did. So a lot of people, what? How could you do this to a Christopher Nolan movie? Well, something has to be low on the list. They're all Christopher Nolan movies. They all can't be number one. And so finally, after a month of debating it, talking about it, thinking about it, I went to go see it a second time last week with my wife. She hadn't seen it yet. And so wanted to kind of give some of my takes on that. I posted that I went to go see it. I've been getting nonstop messages from people asking me, was it better the second time around? And the first thing I'll say is that this is absolutely a movie that rewards a second viewing. Regardless of if you had issues with it, if you thought it was confusing, if you had issues hearing things, take that totally out of the equation. The movie is designed to reward watching it a second time because things do go forward, then they go backward, and you learn about different characters as you go along. There's a lot of little hints that are dropped all throughout the film that you pick up on it a lot more. When you're in that opening sequence of the film, it's totally different when you watch it the first time versus when you watch it having seen the whole film. There's a lot of things that you interpret, experience different because of that. Likewise, when you get to the airport sequence, obviously that sequence is very different when you watch it a second time versus the first time. And so you're just paying attention to all kind of the things going on. And that's cool when a movie is designed that way, that it just rewards. It gives you a gift if you watch it a second time. And that absolutely did happen for me with this film. Beyond that, just in the simple fact of, could you follow things better a second time? Of course, if you go into a movie with very little context, watch it, and it's intentionally very layered and complex. Of course, watching it a second time when you know what the story is, you can follow it a lot better. And so, because of that, you're able to enjoy things a little bit more. One of my complaints on my initial viewing is when you don't know who the characters are, when you don't fully understand what they're trying to do, you can't appreciate the sequence as much. So, when you watch it a second time and you understand the characters better, then you can just be in the moment and appreciate the action and everything that's unfolding in front of you. And I had that experience with this movie. Another thing, big criticism I had with the film the first time around is that I couldn't hear it very well. As I said before, I watched it in a Cinemark XD theater the first time I watched it. This time I watched it totally normal Cinemark. I mean, it's professional, up to date, but it wasn't XD. It wasn't an enhanced one. And I could hear a lot better the second time around. I don't know if some of that is just because I also knew where things were headed, so I could listen a little bit better to the film, but I didn't have the same experience of like really struggling to follow what was going on. I could hear the dialogue better. And then talking with my wife afterwards, she'd heard me say that I had a lot of trouble understanding the film when I saw it the first time. And what she said was, yeah, I remember you said that about halfway through the movie, but I'd watched half the movie before I even thought about that because I hadn't had trouble hearing it. So I'm not quite sure what that means because people seem to have very different experiences with this film, depending on if you're in this seat versus this seat, depending on what theater you're in, or just depending on the day that you watch it. And that's just interesting to me. I don't know what to make of that people some people are saying they've had no trouble anytime they've watched it hearing the sound. I've had two different experiences with two different theaters. And then likewise, when I saw it the first time, the guy next to me had no issues. I had a lot of issues hearing it. Don't know what to make of that because it's so inconsistent. A couple other things to kind of discuss in it. Moving along to the third act of the film, I described the third act previously as kind of total nonsense to me, that I just could not follow it at all. I did not know what was going on because you had two timelines that were going in opposite directions, and it would cut between the two of them. And so you'd watch a visual that was amazing as a building blows up at the bottom, comes together at the top, and then re-explodes. You're seeing stuff like, whoa, we've never seen anything like that before. It's awesome. I don't know what it means. I don't know what just happened, but that one shot was cool. But the sequence overall felt a little bit like just visual noise to me. I couldn't follow enough of what was going on, so I couldn't care enough about what was happening because I couldn't feel the urgency or the tension because I just wasn't following it. So much stuff was happening. Watching it a second time, knowing where it's going, and paying better attention because I knew what to pay attention to, it was a little bit better. I could follow it a little bit more. It was more coherent to me. Still, I wouldn't describe it as an action sequence where I felt like I was along for the ride, where you're just just enjoying watching the visual spectacle and feeling edge of your seat as they're trying to get somewhere in time. That's not the way that I would describe the third act of this film. That's not really, I couldn't get there. I could understand it better. I could have a little bit more appreciation, but it's still, when you're trying to have forward and backward motion with tension with a ticking clock implies that we're moving towards it. And when you have people moving the opposite direction, it just does, it's something weird to, at least how I experienced the sequence. I haven't gotten to the point yet where it was just awesome to me as of this moment in time. A couple other things that I maybe bugged me a little bit more on second viewing, whereas there's a lot of things that were better, a lot of things improved. I would say the villain motivation and the actual kind of stuff about the people in the future and their motivation and the political, I don't know if to call it political, the Earth messaging, I just don't know that they fully work. You have to get me to the point in time where I believe that someone's going to want to cause a temporal apocalypse. You have to do a little bit better than the guy's perspective on things. If I can't have it, no one can. I have to have something that's a little bit more complex than a 5-year-old toddler wigging out. That's not very compelling to me. Like when that's as kind of far as your motivation. I get that he's a psycho, and there's a lot of in the performance that I really liked, but the specific way they articulated what's driving him, I didn't think it was quite there. I didn't think it was as strong as it needed to be for me to fully appreciate the film. And for that reason, that was something that's maybe a little bit weaker for me. And that's another one that kind of even came from some conversations. And then even I hadn't picked up on my first viewing that there was a little bit of a environmentalist message about the earth being messed up and the people from the past not having anything left, and that being some of their motivation. So watching it a second time, I was like paying attention for that. It's literally like a line of dialogue. It's one or two lines of dialogue. It's just something that happens in there and then you forget about it. And if you're going to put something in there that's trying to give a motivation for people and it ties to, we need to take better care of the earth, probably shouldn't just be a line of dialogue in a movie that has a lot of lines of dialogue, that has a lot of exposition, that it just kind of gets lost in the mix. So that probably could have been a little bit better in the way that they handled some of that. So that's kind of my first impressions of it. If I was just kind of give my feelings on it, it certainly makes more sense. It's a little bit more enjoyable. It rewards a second viewing. I could get on board with the action sequences or some of the sequences a little bit more because I was tracking better along with what their motivation or what their goal was. It wasn't really a big shift on the movie for me. Some of my buddies who had similar criticisms as me, but I think were more negative on the film, they had a bigger bump up in their enjoyment. I didn't really have a big bump up in my enjoyment. I still see basically the same issues. The first act of the film, to me, I think it just doesn't explain enough about what's going on. So we just have characters that we don't know doing things that we don't understand until we get to the end of the film, and then it kind of fills in some gaps. So things aren't explained enough for us to care about any of it in the first act. Second act, I think, is pretty strong. The middle of this film, I think, by far is the part that is most cohesive. By then, we know who the characters are, we know what they're trying to do, and they start doing some of the cool inversion stuff, so you get the spectacle. And then when you get to the third act, I think it's just a little bit too much going on for me to be able to fully buy into it. His ambitions, I think, exceeded what he's able to do with his execution in that big showdown at the end of the film. Now, I will say the final scene, the last little tag with Neil, love all that. All that kind of dialogue there and the discussion of things. People are asking me, do I want a sequel? I'll talk about that in just a little bit. That's a really nice scene, but the actual third act itself with two timelines and everything, I think it just... the execution wasn't fully able to pull together the storytelling. The spectacle works there, not the storytelling side to it. So overall, I would probably land pretty close to I don't think I would bump it up to a B+. I think I would stay at probably a B. Probably my enjoyment factor would bump up like a 0.5 or something. I don't know what I said. I think a 7.5. Maybe it's up to an 8. Something like that. It's a minor bump up. It's a more definitive... Yeah, it's an enjoyable film that has some significant flaws. It's an ambitious film that the execution doesn't quite meet the ambition. That's essentially what I said before, and that's essentially what I would hold to at this point in time, having rewatched it. I don't, you never really know how a movie will sit with you a year later. So I don't know if it'll move dramatically in my rankings whenever the next Nolan film comes out and I update my ranking. If I were to do my ranking again now, I don't think I would shift things too much. Maybe it would move up one spot, maybe. But it's kind of right in that essentially the same spot of how I felt about it. Little tweaks. So from there, a few more things. Some of you guys asked in the comment section, what did I think about the score of the film? And I let me try and remember the name of the person that did the score on this one. It's Ludwig Göransson. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I mean, I thought the score was great. I just think it's an example of sometimes we see the top guys, Hans Zimmer, John Williams, and we think, oh man, they've got to do it. Oh, Hans Zimmer isn't scoring Tenet. Oh no. There's a lot of great people out there that can do some amazing scores, and this is an example of that. Hans Zimmer, sometimes you know what you're going to get from a Hans Zimmer score because he's done so many. He's done so many great ones, but he's done 30 years worth of iconic scores. So you can get a flavor, a guess of where he's going. So bringing in some of that new blood, I think we got a great score that's like frantic, that adds energy to it. And it's even like, one thing I noticed on second viewing, how much of the score is in reverse. Like when they're doing the final battle, one of the ways it signifies which team you're watching between the red or blue team is that it switches to a score that's going in reverse. That's really cool. And when you have music that's in reverse that still sounds good, that's awesome. That's really cool. So I thoroughly enjoyed the score for the film. Actually, I'll talk about one more thing before I go into full spoiler mode. Some people are asking a bunch, would I want to see a sequel to this film? And I would be totally open to it. Nolan, I'm pretty open to Nolan doing whatever Nolan wants to do. So if Nolan wants to do a sequel, if Nolan wants to do a small film, if Nolan wants to do a historic epic, I'm pretty open to whatever Nolan wants to do because I just really enjoy his work and he seems to have good instincts as to what he should and shouldn't do. And not everything's going to be your 10 out of 10, but I think he still has... He has a perfect score. He hasn't made a bad movie. He's just made a few that don't fully deliver on the promise of the premise. So if he wants to do a sequel, if he designed this movie to have follow-ups, I'd be on board with it. And without saying too much, the movie absolutely sets up a sequel. It ends on a note where you're like, oh, I wonder where else they're going with this. If Nolan wants to tell that story, I'm game for it. In fact, I'm going to throw this out there. I don't know that there's a reason that it has to be Nolan. I think that I'd be totally open to the concept of Nolan working with some talent that he's discovered to make a sequel, a spinoff, whatever they want to do with it. I'm not opposed to that idea. Maybe that could be a really good idea. Maybe it's a terrible idea, but I'm open to the idea of someone besides Nolan doing a sequel to Tenet, or if Nolan wants to do a sequel to Tenet, I would be very open to exploring this world a little bit more. And I think there's a lot of potential of once the world is set up, once we know the rules to this world, which we do now, some of my issues with this film kind of go away. The first act where we're being introduced to it, 2 times watching it, I still think they're not giving enough information. Having already executed the third act of this film, they learn what doesn't work. Once you've done it, you can learn from that and make it better. So I'd be very open to a sequel. One more question that's popping up a lot in the chat. This is going to spoiler category. Or of sorts. So if you haven't seen it, leave. It's also fan theory stuff. People are asking, do I believe that Neil is Max? Do I believe that Neil is the grown-up version of the lady in the film, her son, him all grown up, and then he becomes this inversion time traveling spy, whatever you want to call him. Do I believe that's the case? I haven't watched any of the full people that have elaborated on that theory to give all the evidence. The movie clearly hints at it. The movie clearly does some things to indicate that it could be the case. Do I want it to be true? I don't know. I kind of like Nolan ambiguity, where he puts some things out there that you hint at it, but you're not quite sure what is and isn't true. I like it when he does that, and he kind of did that here. If we get a sequel and they give an answer to that, I think I'd lean towards there'd be some fun payoff, and yes, I think there's a lot of potential to give it some more emotional stakes if you do that. So maybe I'm cool with that. I'd have to see the full argument for it, though, and watch the movie specifically looking for the evidence. But I think I would be for it. Yes, I think I would be for the idea that Neil is grown up Max, and I think the storytelling potential there gets interesting because obviously you're talking about someone that went way far forward, way far back, and how does that even work? And there's just a lot of interesting ideas inside of that I would be interested in exploring. Terminator is asking, is this recorded? No, this is live right now. That's how I was able to pull up your little question right now. Let me see if we have any questions that tie into exactly what we're talking about. Some of you guys are asking questions that are not about Tenet. I will not be answering them. This is not a Q&A. Would you say it's top 5 Nolan material? I guess you didn't watch my ranking. Go check out my Nolan ranking. That answers it. But I already answered that really in here as well. Okay. All right, I'm not really seeing any questions for me to elaborate on that are related to the movie Tenet. So there you have it. That's my quick take, or I don't know if it's that quick since it was 20 minutes long, kind of giving my experience having watched it a second time. I liked it a little bit more. It definitely rewards the second viewing, but it wasn't a dramatic shift for me. It just filled in some gaps, but I think the first act still just jumps into the action without explaining stuff enough, and the third act is still a little bit more ambitious. Do you think then I think they were able to he was able to fully pull off with what he was trying to do with two different timelines kind of going on at the same time. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to check out my other thoughts on this film, you can just search for Sean Chandler, Tenet, Sean Chandler, Christopher Nolan, and you'll find my ranking and my review for it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and keep talking movies too much.